There are certain hymns that can just take your mind to certain people and places. The last one we just sang made me think of my grandfather-in-law, Tom Reinhardt. He used to like to lead that song, and just the way he led it, it always reminds me of him whenever I hear that song sung. And then the song before that of Throw Out the Lifeline, I don't know that I've ever actually sung that in a congregational setting, but it reminds me, I think it was on a Waltons movie. And so I'm not going to say that dates me, that dates my parents who showed that movie to me. But those are good old songs that speak to the work that we need to be involved in as Christians. And I want to thank you all for the work that you shared with me over the last several weeks in your fellowship with me as we went to Fiji and edified that group and did our best in the work of evangelism. You actually entered into fellowship with me on this work before I even moved here. My last trip to Fiji was in 2018, and my brother was not able to go with me, so my dad went with me then, and then we had a trip planned for 2 years later. Stephen and I were alternating years. I think this is probably my 8th or 9th trip over to Fiji, and then started doing biannual trips, and it's kind of slowed down since then. But of course, some things happened in 2020 that put our trip in that summer on hold. And then in 2021, there was another outbreak of COVID in Fiji, so we couldn't go in 21. Then in 2022, we planned to go, but they also still had some restrictions that could have shut us down and quarantined us for 2 weeks whenever we got to Fiji, which would have ruined a 3.5 week trip. So because of scheduling conflicts, and then because Stephen also had a trip planned for 23, we were finally able to go in 2024. And since then, of course, my family has moved here, and we've entered into another kind of fellowship and a local work with one another. But I want to thank you for the support that you have given to Fiji and to this trip. And also, I've sent out a report in thanks to some of the other congregations that entered into fellowship with this work as well back in 2019. Just by way of reminder, I know most of us are aware of the work in Fiji, though some of you have come in the last year and you may not have heard Stephen's report last year. This work started years and years ago when my dad was looking for a place that spoke English and where the gospel had not gone in truth. And so he eventually landed on Fiji. He did some crazy stuff and eventually wound up there with a tent ready to sleep on the road if necessary. And things worked out a little bit better. He was able to get several studies just in the couple weeks he was there. And then eventually he and my mom moved to Fiji and lived there for 2 years and really started and established the work. And since they're living there, I have gone there while they lived there, and I've gone there since they're leaving back to the States, and it's always encouraging to see the growth in the work in Fiji. I'll show you a quick map just to kind of get a lay of the land where Fiji is. You can see it up in the top right corner. It's kind of outlined in red dots there. Just that small island forms kind of a triangle with Australia and New Zealand. Fiji for Australia and New Zealand is kind of like our Hawaii. That's the not too far destination that you can go and you can spend time in the resorts and not actually see the real Fiji. We spend time in the real Fiji and not in the fantasy land of the resorts. If we zoom in a little bit more on Fiji, you can see that Fiji is actually made up of several islands, but 2 main islands, and we spend nearly all of our time on the big island, Vetilevu. And if we zoom in just a little bit further, you will see that where the international airport is Nadi. Here's the capital of Suma, but we spend most of our time over here on the west. And that is where we support Nevatesh Dutt, and you can find information and reports from him every month that are emailed out, or else look at the written reports. Nevatesh is doing a great work in Fiji. I appreciate him so much. He left Hinduism into denominationalism, left denominationalism into the one true church, and he has been learning and working hard ever since. Now, for Colton and I, this is, I think, our second trip together. We went together, I think it was 2014, though I could be off on that. That may have been the year that Stephen and I went. Maybe it was 2013. Then Colton went with his wife in 2016, and then I went with Dad in 2018. And so we were finally able to travel together again. His children are a little bit older. He was able to get away from the demands of the local work for just a little bit of time, and the congregation there was able to kind of fill in while he was away. And we began our travels to Fiji just after preacher training, the Tuesday after preacher training in July, and we stayed for 3 weeks and a day. I say 3 weeks and a day, however, some of the travel kind of overlaps with some of those opening and closing days. So it's probably right around 3 weeks or just shy of 3 weeks on the ground in Fiji. We were able to board a plane together in Dallas. I flew from Huntsville to Dallas. He flew from Tulsa to Dallas. And then we were able to fly together to San Francisco. This is the first time we have flown through San Francisco together. And then from San Francisco over to Fiji. Normally, I have flown from Los Angeles to Nadi. However, I will give some more information about San Francisco on the way back because it did cause us some problems. And so I was very thankful to be talking to the flight attendant on the way back from Fiji, and he said, you know what, starting in December of this year, we're going to fly direct from Dallas. So that means we'll be able to fly from Huntsville to Dallas and straight over to Fiji, and that's going to cut out a lot of those troublesome times of coming through Los Angeles and San Francisco, getting through customs and all that. We landed in Fiji. There was our plane that we flew over in. At least I think that's the plane that we flew in. And there's just something about landing in another place. It's a different feel when you get off the plane. It's a different smell when you get off the plane. I'm not saying it was a bad smell. It's just not America. It was different. And there's different feeling when you get off the plane and you're in a new place. It helps you to appreciate kind of that sojourner feeling, that pilgrim feeling, that you're not home anymore. However, one of the great things about not being at home anymore, though we miss our families, is that we have a singular focus. There are no distractions, and I'm not saying that family and work here is a distraction, but there's one thing we are there to do, and that keeps us very focused for the 3 weeks that we were there. After we got through customs, got our bags, Nevitesh had picked us up. It was around 5:30 a.m. local time, and he took us to our apartment, and so we got to these accommodations. I'm very thankful that my parents found these accommodations. Normally, we have been staying in hotels on the north side of Nadi, and because of poor infrastructure and more traffic, it gets very difficult to drive through Nadi at times. And so Mom and Dad were able to find an Airbnb on the south side of Nadi, which avoids all the traffic, so that cuts out a lot of dead time. And also that's closer to Corvuto, where the congregation assembles, where most of the Christians live. It just made things a lot easier. And so we stayed at this place. This is called Libby's Vacation Rentals. Basically what it is it's a house. The owners live on the top floor, and they rent out the bottom floor. And so we got the bottom floor, which meant we had kitchen accessibility. We had 2 bedrooms, bathrooms, a fair-sized living room so that we could have Bible studies there. And the wonderful thing about the owners is they say, come on, bring anybody that you want, and you can just use this as you would your own home. You can have Bible studies. You can invite people from the community to have Bible studies and come into this place. Now, I think one of the reasons they do that is because they have a top-notch security system. This is Pluto, and he was always roaming around. We got to be good friends with Pluto because he liked to eat the food we didn't eat, and so we would share with Pluto, and he protected us, and we fed him. So we were very thankful. It was very good accommodations. As you can see, there's a mini split in every room, so we actually had air conditioning, which was nice, even though in the summer here, it's winter over there in the southern hemisphere, and so it was very comfortable temperatures. It would get up into the 80s, but normally it was right around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and so we were able to have an enjoyable weather conditions. It's dry, so you don't have rain impeding you most times, and so it was very good accommodations. Besides Pluto guarding on the outside, I did have one other guest with me in my room that I quickly removed from my room. This was in the bathroom just off of my room, and that's a normal size light bulb right there, so you can see about how big he was. When I tried to get rid of him, he decided to jump, and we had a fun little exchange there in the bathroom as I was getting rid of him. With the accommodations, I'm going to say that one of the things that's wonderful about Fiji is that they have great hospitality. Now that's changing. It's a little bit different than it used to be, but as far as the culture of hospitality, but they were very hospitable to us. And so when we had Bible studies, we would also, or just get visits, we would try to be hospitable to them. Colton here was trying out his American cooking, and there are some chocolate chip cookies that he was working on. Now, when you're using a stove that you don't know anything about and it's in Celsius, sometimes you watch it a little bit more closely than you would over in the States. Only one more thing of just kind of general living arrangements over there. Colton and I do have a favorite restaurant that we go to, and I think we went 3 times. Most of the time we were cooking for ourselves or other people were cooking for us, but LC's, if you know, you know. And there's probably only one person that knows. It's a good food. I'm going to show a picture later on where we were actually able to spend some time with a couple of Christians at this restaurant as well. Nevatesh allows us to use his vehicle while we are over there. It's a vehicle that he dedicates solely to whenever we are over there. He has his own car that he normally drives, but then he has his old car and he just didn't get rid of it, and so now he keeps it for us. And then also if he's driving into the interior, any rough areas, he'll use the old car instead. But as you can see, Colton was acclimating very quickly to the being on the right side of the car and the wrong side of the road. As you drive through, the roads are better than they were a decade ago, but it is a beautiful scenery for the most part to drive past. It's not the resorts, but it is beautiful country, and we were able to drive ourselves to get our own supplies and also to drive ourselves to studies and various other things. Now, one of the things about the work in Fiji is, yes, this is an evangelistic trip, but evangelism, preaching the gospel, is not just to non-Christians. And so one of the key works that we try to accomplish when we are in Fiji is the work of edification. We are trying to build up the Christians there, give them a shot in the arm, and just build the fellowship that we have with one another so that they will continue to do the work. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the evangelistic opportunities in the sense of going to non-Christians in just a little bit, but let me start with the edification work that we were able to be involved in while we were there. While we were there, we did all the teaching and preaching on Sundays, and this was actually of benefit to Nevatesh to have those couple of weeks off, not to have to be thinking about that he could give his attention to other things, not only setting up studies for us, setting up schedule of studies for us, but also when we got there, his mother had been in the hospital for a couple of days, and they thought it could be very serious. His mother is a Hindu and has obviously not obeyed the gospel yet. They were worried that she had a very problematic heart condition. And so they had her up at Lautoka Hospital, and we were able to be there while he was not only trying to help us with studies, but he's driving back and forth to Lautoka, making sure they're taking care of his mom appropriately for at least, I think it was probably maybe the first week that we were there. He was occupied with his mother and what was going on there. So he told us that it was quite providential in a sense that we were able to take some of the studies, take some of the sermons so that he could really be there for his mother when she needed him. Now, that being said, where we meet is the porch of Nevatesh's house, and they are really outgrowing this, and so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But we were able to get there on a Thursday, visit with Nevatesh and his mother in the hospital, his family, and then we were able to start studies thereafter. So Thursday was kind of our get a little bit of rest, visit his family, who are mostly not Christians, and then also plan for what was going to be happening over the next several days. This brings us to Sunday, and I'll talk about some of the studies we had in between in just a moment, but they had just started the book of Colossians, or at least they wanted us to start the book of Colossians. So here on this first day, I was teaching Colossians chapter 1, the first half of Colossians chapter 1, and then Colton wound up teaching the rest of chapter 1, and then I started into chapter 2 for them on the third Sunday that we were there. As far as sermons go, Colton preached that first Sunday on Deuteronomy chapter 8 on a lesson called We Need the Wilderness. He actually was asked by Nevatesh to keep that and use it for a couple of Christians who weren't able to be there on Sunday, and so in one of the personal Bible studies we had, he retaught that lesson. Basically what he was saying is, God allows hardship for a reason, and Deuteronomy 8 speaks to that. If you're interested in the points that he makes, I'm sure a recording of somewhere online, I think he had preached it somewhere over here, maybe at his congregation, but I think also he wrote an article that's going to be appearing in Truth Magazine soon on the very thing, and so you can see his points on that. The class and the sermon were both well received. Here are the Christians gathered together on the front porch. I believe this was actually the second Sunday we were there, because here you can see right here, this woman right here is Perun. She was not able to come the first or the third Sunday. We were able to pick her up on the second Sunday. She is a dear woman, a sweet sister. She has two very handicapped siblings, and so she is mostly homebound, taking care of them. And what she does most of the time is gets on the cell phone and listens to the sermon as Nevatesh preaches, and she just does what she can. If she can get some help, like she was the second, then she will come to the assembly. Someone will give her a ride. But a lot of times, she just can't find the help who will actually watch her siblings and take care of them. And so she is quite frightened to leave them, lest something happen to them while she is away. But here is most of the group. There are a few who are missing. In fact, another picture will probably show a few more in just a moment. But, of course, there's that guy. He obviously doesn't fit in with most of the other people here. But we have Indar has passed away, but here is his daughter and his son and his wife. His wife, Shami, is Nevatesh's sister. They used to be their own church, if you will, whenever Indar was living. Now they've been able to move closer since his passing, and they are worshiping there with them. Here is Shu, but then his brother Jatesh and his mother Indra, they are all Christians, and they are regulars there. Here is Harry, and I think he may have knocked on Harry's door, but then I can't remember the exact sequence. Was he baptized when you were there on the trip? And so Harry is a regular. Harry is a very funny individual, but he's a regular. He comes. Then back here, this is Munil's father, Shiv, and he was baptized a few years ago now, and his wife and his son Munil were not there this time because her elderly mother, in her 90s now, had fallen and bruised her thigh, and they had to take her to the hospital. I'll have a picture of Munil and his mother in just a little bit. They're regulars. And then finally, in this picture, here's Nevatesh, his wife, Manju, and then his two daughters, Marilyn and Evelyn. And we'll have closer pictures of them in just a little bit. On a different Sunday, you get a few more individuals here in the back. This is Melisha and Margaret, and some of their family was also there. I still remember them. Their father has passed away. Unfortunately, when he passed away of a heart attack, he was not faithful to the Lord. But years ago, we were just knocking on doors in the community, and he came walking up. I don't even think it was his house, and we invited him to have a Bible study with us, and he became a Christian. His wife became a Christian. He and his wife have since fallen away, but his daughters, since his passing, have gotten a lot more serious. And so we are glad to see them there this time, and we hope they will continue. Here is the entire group, and I've pointed out most of them. I'm going to go ahead and point here. Here is Munil, but then here is Joe, and we'll talk about Joe in just a little bit. Here is Colton again, I think teaching the Bible class, and then I decided to, when, how Paul became all things to all men, I decided to become Fijian while I was there, and so I had on my Bula shirt. But this time I was preaching on the deity of Jesus, my Lord and my God. And I tried to connect it to how they have left their gods to serve one God, and we need to share that good news of the one God of the Bible, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, specifically Jesus, and commit ourselves entirely to him. The final sermon that Colton preached on the third Sunday was Philippians chapter 4, think on these things, and talked about how we need to meditate on the right things so that the God of peace will be with us. Here is a close-up picture of Nevitesh and his family. Again, Nevitesh is doing great work, and I'll have some more to say about him as we go through. Here on that same day, we were able to take a picture of the three of us together. We spent a lot of time with Nevitesh. In fact, after the first Sunday, we drove down together that afternoon down to Suva. Here's a picture of us on our way to Suva. Just snapped a picture outside of the vehicle as we were driving. He had an appointment down in Suva at the Capitol trying to get his visa to come over and visit. He's visited here once before, but to get a visa if you're a Fijian trying to get to the U.S. I can understand that at some level. In fact, a fallen away Christian that we used to know, she had tried for a visa forever and ever just to visit America. And she tried and tried and tried, and it never happened. And then finally she got it, and this was after she had fallen away. She goes over to California, and she disappears. And so I can understand how the government is somewhat worried that people are just going to go for a better life and just disappear and not come back to Fiji. However, Nevitesh has family that's going to be remaining in Fiji. He has ties that will pull him back. There's been some difficulties in getting that visa. We're hoping now that we've struck out twice that we'll be able to figure out before the third some things that we can do from this side to help him be able to get a visa so that he can come to preacher training, so that he can come and visit the churches that support him over here. Here's a picture from Suva as we were traveling back, so you can see it's just on the coast there. While we were there, we not only did teaching and preaching on Sundays, but that evening after we got back from Suva, on the Monday evening after we got back from Suva, we had our a personal Bible study with Parun. There she is in the back, and then with Pushpa, who is a Christian but doesn't attend very much. And then do you remember the friend's name? It's a neighbor who is still a Hindu, and she invites them to come, and we had this Bible study. She wanted us to teach through the book of Galatians, and so I taught Galatians in 3 classes. Some of you are thinking it's taking us a year to get through Galatians. 3 classes through Galatians, and then we spent 3 classes on the book of Ephesians, and Colton taught the book of Ephesians. She not only had this study in the evening, but then we came back on various days when we didn't have studies so that we could continue to study with her. We see this as a very important work, since she's not able to get together with other Christians, that we can go over and every other day or so have a Bible study with her. I think it means a lot to her, and it means a lot to us to see just the faithfulness of Sister Parun. Another study that we had throughout the days as well was the book of Revelation. Now, Nevitesh said, this is the first time I'm studying through the book of Revelation. However, I think Stephen taught it 5 years ago, or something like, maybe Seth. And then 5 years before that, I taught the book of Revelation. So obviously, Stephen and I did not do a good enough job that he remembered the book of Revelation. But we studied through the book of Revelation. I think it took about 7 or 8 classes. And so he would come over during the day at times, and we'd work our way through the book of Revelation. Colton took lead on that since he had just taught the book of Revelation recently at his congregation. Another personal Bible study that we had with members there, this is Shiv and Radha. These are the parents of Munil, and I'll again talk about Munil in just a little bit. They invited us to their home, and we ate a meal together, and then we also had Bible studies together. Please pray for them. This in Fiji, you have native land that you lease, and they have had a family 99-year lease for a long time, and they were just told by the owners, native Fijians, and they are Indo-Fijians. Their heritage is from India instead of the island itself. They were just told that 6 years from now, when their 99-year lease ends, they're going to let them keep the house, but they're going to take all their land and the farmland that they have built up and built into a productive business. And so pray for them. Hopefully something will change and they won't lose their livelihood, if you will. We also had men's studies every Saturday, and all the men who are able to come from the congregation would get together. They do this regularly, weekly. They get together for men's meeting and men's study. And so we all got together, and we taught through Hebrews 10, 11, and 12. Nevatesh had told us, I want something on faithfulness and maybe something that was taught at preacher training. So I had just taught Hebrews chapter 11 at preacher training. So we talked about faith and faithfulness from mainly Hebrews 11, but we worked in the context of chapter 10 and also the context of chapter 12. And so I taught the first class, Colton taught the middle class, and I taught the last class again. This was an enjoyable time. They're very attentive. They want to be faithful, and I'm so happy that there are strong men. Sometimes I've gone on trips to other places, over to Africa and Costa Rica for evangelistic trips, and it's wonderful to see a group that started from nothing, and now you have strong men, not just women, but strong men. A lot of places it's just a lot of women, and the men aren't very strong. Here you've got some strong men. And if things continue, I would not be surprised if in a generation from now or less, maybe there could someday be elders in Fiji. So these men are doing well. So we studied those things together. Here are all of us together. Starting from the left, Colton, Nevatesh, Harry, Munil, Jatesh, me, and then Joe on the far right. One other study that we were involved in are what they call their roaming Bible studies. Instead of all coming to the meeting place at Nevatesh's house every week for a midweek study, what they do is they go to different members' house. And so that means you're probably doing that every 6 to 8 weeks, that you are hosting the entire group coming and having a Bible study. And this time it was at Nevatesh's house. But we also met at Shiv and Indra's house, and then also Shu and Jatesh's home. They are studying through each of the Psalms. They're taking a psalm a class, and so we taught Psalm 54, 55, and 56. And those were, I think, helpful Psalms for them because those are some Psalms that really deal with what about when life is difficult? What about when you have enemies? What about when you have people who don't believe in the God that you believe in? How do you respond? And so you had some praise, you had some lament, and all that came together, and they responded very well to those studies, and they will continue those studies through the Psalms. Here, Colton was teaching at this particular study, and we all got together. I should say at these studies, unlike most of the other studies, we all sing a little bit, 2 or 3 songs, and we were thankful that on this particular one, we also got to hear them sing a song in Hindi. They usually sing in English, especially while we're there, but they were able to sing a song together in Hindi, and that was beautiful. We had various personal Bible studies. In fact, just about every night was filled with a study, usually with a Christian, because everybody wanted a chance to have a Bible study with us, and so we did that sometimes in the daytime. A lot of the evenings were filled up with that, and then we also found times to try to reach out to the community. And so that brings us to evangelism. Again, one of the primary things we were doing was building up the Christians who are there, but then we also wanted to try to reach out and assist in some of the studies that are ongoing, but then also see if there could be some interest. One thing, and I was talking to Brad last week, he said he likes to hear about the successes of the works that we support. He said, but I also like to hear about the failures as well, if necessary, because that shows that you're trying different things. And here was one that wasn't as effective this time. Mom and Dad had started doing a community Bible study while they were there for the 3 or 4 weeks that they were there. They had made this sign. Theirs had been Friday at 7 p.m., so we had to get imaginative and create and try to figure out how to cover that. We were able to find what we needed to cover it and make it a Sunday night. We planned on doing this every Sunday night where we invited people from the community around our apartment and asked them to come. However, that first Sunday night was wound up being taken up because, like I said, we drove with Nevitesh to his work down, or to the capital, trying to get the visa. But then we continued to invite some people in the community and tried the next Sunday night. And what we did is Colton and I kind of stayed together but also split apart down the road, and we basically asked, if you could hear any lesson of these 3, what would be most interesting to you? And whichever one gets the most votes, that's what we're going to do this Sunday night. I think it wound up being that by like 1, the vote went to, are we in the end times? And so that's what Colton was going to teach. And so we got the sign together. We had done some inviting. Unfortunately, unlike when Mom and Dad were there, no one from the community came to that study. However, members of the congregation came. Munil and I think Shu and Jaytesh, or just Jaytesh and his mother, and maybe another 1 or 2 came to that study. I'll tell you why Nevitesh and even I were not able to be at that study in just a moment. But they were very receptive to the study because Colton went through several things about the end times, Matthew 24, Book of Revelation, and he said that all of them had a comment about how on a particular point, they'd say, this particular point helped me to understand about the end times and what we think about end times as Christians. So that was productive, though at the same time we weren't able to actually get a study with anyone from the community through that effort. We did have a couple of very promising leads that were up in Lautoka. And so as you can see, we flew into Nadi, and our apartment was south of Nadi, about where the mouse shows there, the cursor. But up here in Lautoka, we traveled up there on that first Sunday night, or the second Sunday night, because Harry, I showed him, he said, my sister would like to have a Bible study. And Nevitesh said, okay. And we were trying to figure out how are we going to fit this, where are we going to fit this into the schedule. Colton and I said, we don't have to stay together. And so Colton stayed behind and did the Bible study, the community study, and I went with Nevitesh and Harry, and we went up to Lautoka and visited his sister, Rukmani. That first study, they have come out of Hinduism. In fact, they've torn down the idol outside the house, so that part has been done. They've been attending a denominational church, and Nevitesh said, we need to teach them about plant the seed of the one true church. And I said, okay, we can do that. And so that Sunday night, we talked about the one true church. And I used an outline, a mental outline that my dad has been using in Fiji. There's consistency there, so I just use the same one that he does, is that God planned one church, promised one church, established one church, adds the saved to one church. Jesus is the head of one church. Jesus is the savior of one church. And they were right on. So Rukmani, Harry's sister, his other sister, and her name is escaping me right now, and then the oldest sister's grandson, Avihan, who was probably about Noah's age, 10 or 11 years old. They were just answering question after question. They were engaged. One church. They want to be a part of that one church. So we said, would you like to study again? They said, yes, let's do that the next Sunday. So that would have been our last Sunday that we were there. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of them. You know, when you're going to have a Bible study, you don't necessarily always ask, can I take your picture? And so we had a Bible study with them on the following, and they heard it, they were receptive. It was a little bit more subdued on that one. Because what Nevitesh asked me to speak on was the idea of how do we discover the will of God so that we can find what it means to be a part of that one true church. And thus, there are some examples given of here's what the one church of the Bible does. This is what congregations who are made up of true Christians do. This is what counterfeits do. And they were thinking. And I need to talk to Nevitesh and see if, I think it was probably yesterday, their time, that they were actually going to be able to get together with them again. They had something the next Sunday, but they had arranged to have a study with them 2 weeks from the time we left. And I'm just curious how they are doing with that, because we're throwing some things at them that they've not been presented with before. But I think they were engaged enough to realize that's what the Bible said. In fact, one thing I tried to leave with them is unless you can point to it in your Bible, you shouldn't believe it. And they were very much on board with that idea, especially since they had had a bad experience with the pastor who had come from India and was preaching a meeting of sorts at the current denomination that they were a part of. That pastor came in and said, God's will is that you should not cut a wedding cake because then you are splitting apart the covenant. It's like, where's that in the Bible? And so they got on board with that idea of, you can't find that in the Bible. And we're only going to believe what we can find in the Bible. So now they had to deal with, here's something in the Bible that is not what I've been practicing. And so I'm hopeful that they will continue to listen. Now, on that third Sunday, when we went to visit and study with Rukmani for the second study, we actually had a first visit with Harry's other sister who lives in Lautoka. So there's like 6 children, and we studied with 2 of them, and then there was another sister who, her husband has passed away. She has had some health struggles, and so Harry said, do you think before the study we could go visit her and offer to pray for her health? I said, that would be just fine. And he said, now they are still Hindus, and whenever you drive up into their driveway, you can still see the idol right there in front. He said, they've never invited Christians in to talk to them before. So I said, okay. Nevitesh told me, he said, maybe just ask them what the needs of their family are, offer prayer, maybe just say a few words, but let's just keep this at an initial visit. Well, Nevitesh had something come up and he was not able to go. So Colton and I and Harry went to that initial visit. And as we're getting out of the car, Harry says, before you pray, how about you just spend 5 minutes talking about how great our Lord is and how he can do great things? I said, okay, I can do that. And we sat down, and they were welcoming to us. And so I talked for 5 minutes, just kind of off the cuff, used Ephesians 3 about he can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, showed the power of Jesus. And I said, Harry, are we ready to pray? He said, keep going, brother. It's like, okay. So went for 10 more minutes. And he says, let's go for 15 more. And so then we went for 15 more minutes. And they are listening, and they're engaged. And then we prayed, and then they wanted to give us some tea, and then we went over to Rukmani's house. This sister's name was Rena. And so when you go to Fiji, sometimes it's just, you don't have an outline in front of you. You just have to say what comes to mind, what you know from the scriptures. This was one of those times. However, Harry was very excited because as we talked about the power of Jesus, which led into the lordship of Jesus, which led into we want to be a part of Jesus' people in that short 25 to 30 minutes that we were able to talk. He said to me afterward, they've never invited Christians in. This is the first time they're hearing the gospel, and I think they will keep on studying with us. And so I was pleased to hear that that was the case. Now, one of the most exciting things as far as evangelistic work in Fiji this time was this fellow right here that I already showed you. This is Joe. Joe is a co-worker with Munil. Now, I've known Munil for several years now. I think last time I saw him in 2018, he was teaching, finishing his master's at that time in computer science, I believe, and he was teaching at the university. He has since switched to kind of heading up IT work at the hospital in Latoka. Joe is his coworker, and they ride back and forth together to work all the time. Joe has been a drinker and a partier. Munil said, hey, if we're going to be friends, if we're going to be riding together, you've got to stop that. Joe stopped that. Joe has started making some changes. He started studying with Munil and with Nevitesh. They've laid all the groundwork. I think Dad was able to study with him a little bit on his last trip. And then he was not studying. There was something had kind of separated whenever Stephen went last year that Joe was not available. But this time, he's back in. He was willing to study as he's been studying with Nevitesh. And so Nevitesh said, okay, for our first study, we had 2 studies with Joe. Beyond the various times he came to all the Bible classes on Sundays, all the worships. He came to the men's classes and also came to Munil's family personal Bible studies. So he is fully engaged. And Nevitesh said, okay, what we need to study next is the nature of the law and how we find out what the church does in the New Testament. So I taught that on this Saturday, a week from the Saturday after we got there. Then, after that, Nevitesh said, okay, Colton, your turn. You need to teach on baptism. Colton said, okay, we can do that. And he said, and brothers, as you do these studies, he's been studying, he knows the truth, go get him. And so he asked us to sick him, if you will. And so Colton taught a lesson about baptism and how that is our means of calling on the name of the Lord. And you know what Joe had done on that second class period? He had brought clothes with him in the car before they even studied baptism. And so we went out to, as we affectionately called it, God's Baptistry of the Pacific Ocean. Colton is here taking his confession. They walked out together. He baptized him. And we were so happy to see Joe obey the gospel and become our brother in Christ. Here are all of us together. Again, you can see Munil taking the selfie down there in the bottom left, then Nevitesh, Colton, Joe, and me. You all have been very patient, but let me say just a few more things. As far as evangelistic work goes, one other thing that you don't get to do in the States is have a public school teacher say, hey, we're having a Bible devotional this coming Monday morning before you leave. How about you two come and speak for 15 minutes each to our student body about the recognizing the authority above us, so behavior management, but also how that's tied to the authority of Jesus Christ and that we need to submit to him as Lord. And so we went to Malamala School, I believe it's called, and they gave us a stage. Colton talked for 15 minutes about authority, how we need to submit to authority. That's what Christians do. And then handed it off to me, and I talked about the authority of Jesus and that we need to be ready to meet Jesus as our Savior and our Judge on the final day. And they all listened fairly well. I mean, you're talking elementary school. What I was happy to see is you have Jaytesh here taking a picture, but then you have his Hindu co-teachers sitting here listening to the messages as well. So I'm hoping that will generate some conversation for him as well. And I think he's done that on previous trips, maybe Stephen and Dad as well at various times. Real quick, you saw how they're starting to fill out that porch for their meeting place. They have saved up money, and they have bought this land, purchased this land. Technically, it's a 99-year lease, but they have purchased this land, and they are looking forward to building. There have been some hiccups along the way, but now it seems like there's some answer some answers to those things, and they'll be able to begin clearing it out, maybe building their own building place by next year. According to Fiji law, they have to have it done by next October. So they have a time limit on getting started at least, and so that may be that they will work on that, and we'll maybe even help them out as best we can, go over and visit and help build, construct for a week. We'll see how that all plays out. We left on the Tuesday evening of the third week, and we said our goodbyes. Mom and Dad have taught them about potlucks. Potlucks weren't necessarily a Fijian thing, so Mom and Dad taught them about potlucks, how you can each bring a dish and you can all share a dish. Normal hospitality over there is you invite someone to your home and you feed them. You prepare everything, and so it's quite an ordeal. But we all came to the apartment on that Monday night. A bunch of people from the congregation came together. We all got to visit, say our goodbyes, have a meal together. They have affectionately called it Mini America, this little apartment. And that actually started with Stephen, because I think Seth liked it very cold, and so they started calling it Mini America because it was so cold with the air conditioner, but also because we prepare American dishes, they prepare Indian dishes, and so they called this Mini America. Munil did. The Tuesday before we left, Shiv and Harry came over to say their goodbyes right before lunchtime, and we said, we're thinking about going back to LC's for some of that Natandola chicken. You want to join us? And so they did, and we were able to spend some time together before we flew out that evening. That evening, Nevitesh took us in so that we could get early check-in, get our bags on, and we all got together for dinner that evening as well. And so even though it was mostly goodbyes that final day, it's wonderful to have those friendships because of the fellowship that we have in Jesus, share a meal together, and say our goodbyes. In fact, Colton, they said a kind word at the potluck, and Colton and I each had our kind words and farewells to say to them, and we were reminded of Acts chapter 20, where they were hugging each other and crying, knowing they may not see one another again on this side of eternity, but because of what we have in Jesus Christ, we know it's going to extend far beyond that. This is in Nadi Airport. We were ready to fly out. We got a picture of us getting ready to fly out. However, then we were delayed, as airports tend to do. That delay wasn't going to affect us too much. I think it was only 45 minutes to an hour delay. However, that meant that after we got on the plane and got to San Francisco, what we were supposed to have 3.5-hour layover. Some of that got cut off. There were hundreds of people at customs. And so, long story short, you can ask me if you want the long story. It wound up that Colton missed his next flight. Mine, through the American Airlines app, had auto-changed it, and so they let me run to the gate and get on as they were closing. Colton missed it, but then got a red-eye flight, and we met up in Dallas. Thank you, Stephen, for Dallas breakfast. You can ask him about the joys that he provides to Dad and Mom and me and Colton as well, because of American Airlines. But then Colton and I met up, and then we were able to fly out to our respective locations from Dallas. We got back home again. It's wonderful to be home. It's wonderful to see family. In fact, family had gotten a little bit of Fiji in them as well. There's someone who's sitting right back there who came to greet us. This is after we got back home. Let me summarize with some things that I am thankful for this trip. Number one, the spiritual growth of the Fijian Christians. They are growing, and they have their challenges too, but they are growing, and I am thankful for the work that they are doing over there. For the evangelistic opportunities, please pray for Rukmani and Rena, all those who are involved in Harry's family. Having Harry as a contact, as someone who has changed from Hinduism to Christianity, is going to make a big difference in bringing them along as well. Also for the baptism of Joe Wanga. He seems like a stellar young man. He's growing. I think he's going to continue to grow, and he loves to sing. So maybe he'll be able to lead singing sometime, and it won't be all on Nevatesh. Plans to build a meeting place, please pray for that. I think this will be a great evangelistic opportunity for them, not just edification and worship for them, but they'll be right on the main road. People can just walk in, and they'll be able to also have Bible studies there. And also for the support of American churches. Thank you for your support, and also for the other churches that supported this trip as well. And then just a safe and productive trip. You never know how effective any trip is going to be, and you never know what the lasting effects are going to be. But I fully believe the promise that's made as a statement in 1 Corinthians. If we plant and water, God will give the increase. And so we can be thankful that he is working with his truth. One final thing before we close. If you have a Bible, look with me in Philippians chapter 1. As I extend my thanks to God and to you, I'd just like to note here that it says in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 3, I thank my God upon every remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine, making request for you all with joy, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. So thank you for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. And that affects us. That affects us because in chapter 2 and verse 1 it says, therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship in the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same mind, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit. So we share and we are united because of Christ. And finally, the last time fellowship is used in Philippians is chapter 3. It says in verse number 8, but indeed I also count all things lost for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which is from God, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, if by any means I may attain to the resurrection of the dead. We have fellowship in the gospel that keeps us united, and that gives us a hope and a motivation to press forward to the resurrection, because we have fellowship, not only with Jesus, but with one another, and we want to share that resurrection day together. So thank you for your fellowship. Continue to pray for our fellowship with our brotherhood across the world, but especially in Fiji, and pray that God will be effective far and near, and that we will spread the good news wherever we are. If someone needs to respond to the Lord, just like Joe did, if you need to call on the name of the Lord so that you can be in fellowship with him and fellowship with his people, then we ask you right now, heed the invitation of Jesus Christ. Obey his gospel, and you'll be brought into fellowship with him. If you need to respond, why don't you come to the front as we stand and as we sing.